The Donovan Brown.
How are you?
Good, man. Thanks for showing Singapore some love. We appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. I've been there.
If in case you want to contact us, these are our details where you can find us. We have the meetup group since you have been joining us for a long time. We also have a YouTube channel, and I hope that you will subscribe to this. This is not just for the Azure, but we also have the other communities which use the same YouTube channel from data, AI, as well as the Office and the apps community. Today, we have the pleasure of having Donovan Brown, the man in the black T-shirt. He is the he's the guru of DevOps, and he has a hashtag which is a trademark, Rob DevOps on it. Some of you might also know that he is a professional air hockey player and ranked one of the top 11 players in the world, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
And I think you're also a race car driver, Donovan.
That is correct.
Yeah, so I did my pre-study well in that case. So usually we have like a demo session.
where you put your money in the little tube and then the tube goes to the teller, they do something and they send the tube back. Imagine that over an entire hospital, right? Johns Hopkins runs my software that I wrote back then. And basically I controlled all the equipment in the entire hospital to move carriers around. So I wrote the control software for that. I still do that today. After doing that for a while, I ended up at a company called Notion Solutions, which was this small little group of people who were specializing in this product called Visual Studio Team System, if you remember that name, VSTS, back from 2006, 2007 timeframe. And back then, I was working on process. I became a certified Scrum Master. I would fly all over the world helping companies implement Agile. And we would get some continuous integration going, but that's about it. We never did continuous delivery. We're never doing DevOpsy things, but we were really good at doing Agile. We were really good at doing Scrum so that we could help you produce these increments of shippable software. What we noticed is that we struggled when it came time to delivering those increments. And that was what got me interested in continuous integration, continuous delivery, and what we basically call DevOps today. After doing that for about 7 years at Notion Solutions, specializing over this tool built by Microsoft, Microsoft recruited me to come in and say, hey, Donovan, can you help us sell that particular product? Because what happens is we go off to our customers, we tell them how great this product is. They say, I don't believe it's as good as you say it is. And you're about to ask me for a whole bunch of money. Have someone come in here and prove to me that it's that good. That was my job. I would fly in, I would sit there, I would do this amazing demo of VSTS at the time. And they say, oh, wow, it does everything that you promised it would do. I'll sign the check, and then I would go off and I literally do that for a living. I would just go to companies who didn't believe that we could do what we could do, and I would prove that we can do what we can do. I got the opportunity at, I believe it was TechEd North America in 2014. So I joined Microsoft in 2013. I believe it was in December. By March of 2014, I was speaking at TechEd North America on the product called Release Management. It was that missing piece, because remember I told you I was really good at Agile. I was really good at getting people to produce increments of shippable software, but we weren't really good at shipping it. And then when we acquired InRelease, which is a product we bought from InCycle, that was the missing piece. Like that was the part that could take your code and actually deploy it for you into your dev environment, your QA environment, and your production environment. So when I saw that product, I was like, oh my God, that's what I've been missing for all this time. And I just attached myself to that product. I was like, man, if I can understand this product, I can help our customers go further than they've ever gone before. So I just obsessed over this product. I met the engineers at Microsoft who were writing it now. I met them at conferences. I talked to them. I picked their brain. And the next thing you know, I was given the opportunity to speak on that product by the person who invented it. He trusted me enough. He saw the passion that I had around his product and asked me to come on stage with him at TechEd. And it went really, really well. I over-prepared. It was the first time I'd ever spoken at a tech conference. I was really nervous, so I rehearsed till I just couldn't get the product wrong. Like the demo always worked. It was great. So when I got on stage and I did it and everyone was excited, it went really well. And then the marketing team got wind of me. And the next thing I know, I'm at TechEd North America, TechEd Europe. I'm at Tech Ready and Tied to Microsoft, Connect, Build, Ignite. And that's probably where some of you may have seen me at those conferences. And once you get on those conferences, it's like getting on a tour. Like you don't come off, right? Once you do good for Scott Guthrie keeps bringing you back, right? And you just keep trying to kill it for him and make sure that your demos are good. And that's how I kind of got started in DevOps as a seller. After selling it for about 1.5 years, the actual product team that makes what is now called Azure DevOps asked me to come over and make Azure DevOps as good as I make it look on stage, because I was really good at demoing it to the point where people would be like, man, that's really an awesome product. Of course, they didn't realize it took me a long time to get that demo to work, right? Because the product really wasn't easy to use. You had to know some inner workings of the product to get it to work the way that I was getting it to work. And the product team said, come over and make it as good as it looks on stage when you demo it. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then eventually I ended up on the team that I'm on now. So what I do is I fly around the world, or now virtually. I go to meetups like this one. I talk to our customers. I go to every name brand you can imagine. I've probably been to that name brand and gone in and talked to their high-level executives, their high-level engineers, talking about how they can do this digital transformation themselves. And when I was in the product group, I was asked to define DevOps. So if you've ever seen the Microsoft definition of DevOps, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. That was me. So I wrote that. And that's become what Microsoft believes and what we drive towards whenever we're trying to help a customer do DevOps. That's what we're trying to do. And we can talk about that today as well. But then again, I ended up on the team that I'm on. So we're a team of cloud advocates. I run about 18 of us now that do DevOps, SRE, the ops side of DevOps, the lift and shift, and then the modern infrastructure people, and that's what I do. So the reason that I wanted to give that introduction is to give you some time to think of some questions, get a better understanding of what it is that I do as an engineer here at Microsoft. Still write code every day. If I can't go back to sleep after this, I'm going to be writing some PowerShell for a module that I write. But it's just what I do all day long. I just love and breathe code, and process is really important. And I go around the world talking to customers about this. So what I wanted to do is give you an opportunity to ask me anything that you want, because you can find lots of videos, but you can't ask those videos questions. So what I'd love to do now is just go ahead and open it up and allow you to ask me anything that you want about your digital transformation. And if not, I have a few questions I might ask, and I also have some FAQs if no one has a question right now. Sure, you can either one. If you want to unmute, feel free to unmute. I'm fine with that. If you want to type your question in, if you're shy, feel free to type your question in the chat. We'll monitor both of them.
Hi guys, Welly speaking here.
Hi.
Well, first, thanks to Ruth and Nilesh to organize this, and then thanks for Donovan as well. I bet this is pretty early for you, isn't it?
Yeah. My alarm went off. I was not happy when my alarm went off. It was like 5 in the morning.
Okay. There is one of the very commonly asked question by my partner and customer. It's about the roadmap of Azure DevOps and GitHub, especially for the customer who would like to onboard to DevOps on Microsoft. Now we know that we have two sort of separate product, right? And I guess my question is, are they in the future or new future is going to run in parallel, or are they merging into one, or are we planning to deprecate it one over the other? And which one should our customer or partner choose as part of the DevOps journey?
All right, great. So we're going to start off with the hardest question first, right? So like you just went right for the good question. All right, so that's a really good question, and let's talk about what happened, right? Azure DevOps is an amazing product that we have inside of Microsoft, and it's still an amazing product, and there's still development being done on that product. So that is a very safe and legitimate choice for you if it does what you need it to do. And chances are it does, because it's an awesome product, and it can get your code from anywhere. If you happen to be inside of GitHub already, that's where your source code is. GitHub Actions, which is their CI system that they're trying to grow into a CD system eventually, and it will get there, is an option for you as well. So what I tell our customers to do is you need to choose which one of those solves the problem that you're currently having today, because there's going to be support for Azure DevOps probably for as long as we're going to be coding, right? So don't worry about next week we're going to deprecate that thing. It's not going to happen that way. The install base is too great, the product is too great, and we're going to have, it's going to take us time to move all that functionality into something like GitHub. Okay, so the right answer is there's no wrong answer to that question. If Azure DevOps is what you need and where your code is, then let's go ahead and use Azure DevOps, because it's a fantastic product. If your code is not in GitHub, GitHub Actions is not an option for you, plain and simple, right? Because the only place where GitHub Actions can retrieve your code from is from GitHub. So if it's in a GitHub repository, Action becomes a candidate for you, but not the only answer. Depending on what it is that you're trying to do, how mature you are on your DevOps transformation, you might need features that simply aren't in Actions today, and Azure DevOps is a fantastic way for you to fill that gap. Matter of fact, yesterday I was building a new pipeline, and I was building it in I was building it in Azure DevOps, because I know how to use that product. I know it's going to be here for a long time, and what I need to do is build a PowerShell module and deploy it into the PowerShell gallery. Even though the code is inside of GitHub, I'm still using Azure DevOps, because for that specific problem, that is the best answer for me. But I have other projects where I'm actually using GitHub Actions, right? So don't look at it as there's a right answer and a wrong answer. They're both right answers. It just depends on where your code is and what it is that you're trying to do. The way that I always talk about this is that I think I actually saw a picture of it the other day. I'm sure you have them everywhere. You've seen a screw, and if you look at the head of the screw, you can decide what screwdriver you should use. You should either use a Phillips head screwdriver or you should use a flathead screwdriver. But there are some screws that you can use both screwdrivers on, right? There's a clear line all the way across that you can put a flathead screwdriver in. But if you look close, there's a small cross across the middle that a Phillips head screwdriver will fit in as well. And I always tell people, which screwdriver are you going to use when you have that type of screw? The answer is whatever screwdriver is closest, right? If it's a flathead screwdriver, you're going to drive it with a flathead screwdriver. If it's a Phillips head screwdriver that's closest to you, that's the one that you're going to use. So it's a long answer to say use either product, whichever one that you believe is going to get you where you want to go, especially today, right? Let's look at the problems you have today And we're going to help you as Microsoft transition from one product to the other should that be necessary in the future. But GitHub is obviously an amazing brand. We're making lots of investments in there. GitHub Actions is going to continue to get better. So again, my answer to you is both of those are the right answer. We're supporting both of those for as long as I'm going to be probably at Microsoft, or we're going to be coding anyway. So there is no wrong answer to that. So does that give you an idea of what we're doing at Microsoft when it comes to GitHub and Azure DevOps?
Yeah, it does, and thanks for that. And
sure.
Do we permanently running these two products in parallel in the future? And what happens if, let's say, I'm using Azure DevOps for the moment, but it turns out to be there's one cool feature that is not available in Azure DevOps, but in GitHub and GitHub Action, for example. Like, how can we, get a feature out of the best both for running, given the fact that this both for running in parallel?
Gotcha. So luckily, the YAML, if you switched over to YAML-based pipelines already, the YAML is very, very similar, right? I mean, extremely similar. There's a few things that make them different. So transitioning in Azure DevOps pipeline over to GitHub Actions eventually will be very easy. Again, because there's such a disparity in the features today, that's a little bit tricky. And the way that the actual tasks are authored is slightly different. But the fact that you're getting comfortable with YAML today, and there's a feature that you need in GitHub Actions, then you should be able to transition from one to the other using YAML very easily. If you're still using the graphical user interface that we have in Azure DevOps, that gets a little trickier because that's actually not stored in YAML. Even if you download that, that's actually stored in JSON, which you could convert if you want to, but it gets a little bit tricky there. So it all depends on the features, and I would think that it's going to be a scenario where right now I don't miss and match them very much today. I either use Actions because what I'm trying to do is very simple and very quick and easy, and when I have to do something that's really mature and grown up with release gates, deployment environments, stage deployments, all that stuff happens inside of Azure DevOps because those are features that simply don't exist. This is me speculating, but what I assume is going to happen over time is that we're going to start to move a lot of the features that we have in Azure DevOps over to GitHub. So you'll be able, I think it'll be more of a, I'll be able to just switch over, not have to pick features from one or the other.
Cool. Thanks, Donovan.
No problem. Great question. All right, what else do we have in here? Based on project stacks, do you have DevOps templates as best practices? All right, that's a good question. There used to be a project that I probably need to go back in and revive. We've kind of abandoned it for some other projects called Yo Team, and it was a command line tool. You could literally just type Yo Team and then answer a few questions. And for, I believe we had in there PowerShell, C#. We also had Node, I believe, and another language that I can't even remember right now. And we would just stamp out an entire project for you. Not only did we give you the actual website, but we gave you the entire CI/CD pipeline using Azure DevOps, where Dev, QA, and Prod. You could deploy to Docker, you could deploy to AKS, you could deploy to App Service, you could deploy to VM. It was amazing. So there is a pattern that you're going to see regardless of the language that you're programming in, and regardless of what it is that you're deploying to. When you think about DevOps, think about what it is that you're trying to do, and you're going to realize that you can apply that to any piece of software. So very rarely do I go into a customer who wants to talk about DevOps and start asking them, so what language are you programming in, or where are you trying to deploy to? Because the things I'm talking about are much higher than that. We're talking about reducing human error through automation. And that, again, doesn't matter if you're programming in C# or Java or C++. What you're trying to do is say there's a lot of manual human intervention that takes place from an idea that we have to running that idea in production. And what we want to do is find the place that hurts the most and remove that part of the system through automation, better processes and practices. And what I tell people is don't start with everything, right? Start with the thing that hurts the most. And if you find that area, let's say, for example, you manually deploy your app into production, which means some poor person has to stop what they're doing, collect all the bits, compile it on their machine, and then copy the files to a server. When they're doing that, if they make a mistake, then all of a sudden everything falls down. So what I would do is I would focus on how do we automate that deployment for you. If it's something like ASP.NET, it would just do an Xcopy deploy. If it's some type of SPA or single page application, again, you can just FTP. There's tons of different ways that we can automate the deployment of that. And when we get that consistent deployment down, what I would do then is say, okay, now let's go back in and figure out what hurts the most now. Again, I didn't ask you what language you were programming in. I don't know if you're using Vue or Angular or React. I don't care. because what we're trying to do is reduce human error throughout the process of deployment. And then what we'd also want to do is look at things like, do you have a good branching strategy? A lot of companies that I visit have really long-lived branches. What I mean by that is that you'd have this main trunk or master or main branch of code. And what you should be doing is creating these branches off of it, doing some type of development, and then merging that branch back into your main branch of code. What I find a lot of customers do is they have these really long branches. What I mean by that is that they branch off to do a feature, and that feature stays isolated for months. So when they finally turn around and try to merge that back into master, there's what we call a merge bomb. Master kept changing, and so did your branch. So when you try to bring them back together again, there's lots of files that are different because people have made changes in both branches. It becomes very painful. That's bad, and that'll slow you down. But if you had short-lived branches with reverse integration, you can mitigate that, which means I'd make a branch, I only have it for a day or two, and every day when I wake up, the first thing I do is I take the master branch and I merge it back into my local branch. That way I'm constantly being able to update my branch so that when I finally merge it back into master, there won't be a lot of conflicts there. It'll be very easy for me to merge back in because every day I've been keeping my branch in sync with the master branch. So again, this is automation, and that practice that I'm talking about, making sure that you have these branches that are first short. You don't want them out there for months. You want them out there for hours or days, and then you want to merge them back in. And keeping them up to date with master does not matter what language is in that repository. Doesn't matter if it's PowerShell or ASP.NET or Node or Java. What you don't want to do is have these long branches. So when I go and I talk to customers, that's what I'm looking for. These high-level themes. Source control management is important. Having continuous integration is extremely, extremely important. That's one of the things that I just can't believe more companies don't have. Most of the products out there that do this are free. You can use Azure DevOps for free, GitHub Actions for free. Our competitors' products, you can use those for free. And what you want to do, and every time a developer commits code, you want that code to be downloaded, compiled, tested, and packaged for deployment. Because when I remember, I used to be a build master for a team, and I remember that we had a rule that if you broke the build, you'd have to bring in donuts. And it was much better for you to break the build than to break production. And the reason that we knew that you had broke the build is because every night our system would wake up, compile all the code, and then identify who actually broke the build for us. If you do not have that, if you don't have that CI/CD system, instead of breaking the build, you break your entire team. What I mean by that is if we don't have a system that's telling us that the build is broken, all the developers come in the next day, they all pull the latest code, and all of them can't compile anymore. You've now stopped the productivity of that entire organization because one person made a mistake on accident and actually committed code that broke everyone else on the team. But if instead of having the human beings pay that price, you have a CI system that every time a developer makes a commit, tries to compile the code, and if it can't, it immediately identifies for the rest of the team, do not get the latest version of code because Donovan just broke it. And I've already sent Donovan a notification, and I can see, okay, what did I just do? Let me go back, let me fix that, let me commit it again, and see if the CI system is happy. Once the CI system says I can compile it, chances are very high that everyone on your team is going to be able to safely download that and compile it. So are there stacks and patterns? Yes, but they're not language specific, right? Those best practices apply across any language that you want. Remove all your bottlenecks, remove as much manual intervention as you can, and get automation in place wherever possible. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to elaborate, but you can have these templates, but again, a lot of the best practices apply regardless of your language. How difficult is it to get high-level managers to understand that their team should be autonomous? Oh, that is a great question, and it's a tough one, because if you don't educate everyone in your organization about what you're trying to do, sometimes they're going to resist what they do not know. And so there's two answers to this question, and the other one is stop asking for permission. So let's first talk about making sure everyone understands. Luckily, again, if you go and you search for DevOps on YouTube, there's lots of content out there for people that's digestible. Some of my videos are really long, which an exec's not going to spend the time to watch, but some of them are very short that are just like, hey, these are the highlights. This is why you want to do this. And the easiest reason to express to your high-level managers of why it's important for your team to be autonomous is because your competitors, their teams are autonomous. Their teams are moving faster than you because they don't have to be relying on all these third parties. They have this silos broken down. The biggest proponent to changing is fear that your competition is doing something that you're not doing. And trust me, I tell this to all of our customers at Microsoft, your customers I mean, your competitors are also our customers. So I've spoken to all of your competition too, and they're already doing this stuff, right? So if you're the last person that I'm talking to, I got news for you. Like, all your biggest competitors are also our customers, and I've already said these things to them, so they're already ahead of you. So your management needs to understand that the longer that they hold off, the slower that you continue to deliver, the faster you're going to become obsolete, because your competition is already doing this stuff. It's just that fear of being obsolete, because we live in a world where our cell phones are the way that we consume most of our information. It's the way we use most of our apps. And it only takes a minute for me to install a replacement for whatever app you have. If I want to, I can replace it in a couple of minutes for free, probably, on my phone. So you don't have the luxury of me having to be inconvenienced to go to the store to buy software and like, oh, I'll just figure out how to get this software to work because I don't want to drive back to the store. Those days are gone. Your customers have very, very low tolerance for slow updates, bad updates, because the alternative is just a click away for them. And they can get that alternative and they'll never be back. So your management needs to understand that because our competition is innovating faster than ever, we also have to innovate faster than ever. And if I'm the bottleneck by not allowing you to be a self-organizing team, because that's how I would describe what you're saying. Autonomous is a good use of the word, but they need to be self-organizing, because autonomous kind of leads me to think silo a little bit. Autonomous, we're on our own. Like, that's not what we want. We want them to be empowered to make whatever decisions they need to make sure that they are the most efficient version of themselves possible, which means you tear down the silos, you make them self-managing, and you get out of your way. That's how I manage my teams. I try to be as hands-off as I can, trust them to know what they're supposed to be doing, and then basically remove any barrier. And that's what a good manager is going to be able to do. But the reason that they should let you do that is because your competition is already doing that. Another way to do that is just to do the right thing. Stop trying to convince them or make them understand. All they're asking you for is, I need this software by then. That's all they understand. There's a deadline. There's a list of features that I want. Give me that software by then. And what we end up doing is oversharing with them. Oh, we're going to have to write all these unit tests, and we're going to do this, and it's going to push the date. And they're going to be like, oh, no, don't worry about that. I trust you. You're going to be fine. You don't need to write the unit test. Just make the date. You shouldn't have told them that you had to write unit test. You know you need to write unit test. Go write the unit test. Give them the dates that you believe are confident dates that you can make, doing the right thing for your company, and stop giving them more information than they need to make an informed decision. And they all say, oh, the date can't move. We all know that that's nonsense. I've been on too many product teams where the people say, Donovan, the date has to be the date. And then we miss the date. And then they move the date. They give us a new date to shoot for. I'm like, wow, I thought the date couldn't move. So why was I here all night? Why was I here over the weekends? Why was I skipping writing unit tests so that I could make this date that I come to find out isn't as immovable as you made it to be? And that's when I realized, you know what? I'm going to do the right thing. Because the reason that I'm here at night and on the weekends is not only because the date that you gave me isn't real, but the software that I produced months ago is garbage, because I also was under the same pressure. I didn't write unit test. I didn't write integration test. I basically cut corners every chance that I could so that I could make this date for you that I am now paying for, because when the developers are here at night, when the developers are here on the weekend, their managers aren't. Right? So they're not seeing the price that you're paying for the sacrifices and the corners that you're cutting. You're the one who's paying for those. So stop allowing yourself to be put in a position where you're doing what you know inside should not happen. I remember once I was giving a demo and I was talking about CI/CD, and I asked the room to raise your hand if you do not have continuous integration in your organization. This was last year, 2019. I was dumbfounded by the number of people whose hands went up when I said, do you have continuous integration? And they said, don't have continuous integration. A lot of people still don't have it. And I asked them, why don't you have continuous integration? It's like, well, our managers, to your point, don't give us time to do it. Our managers don't see the importance of it. And I'm like, well, why did you ask your manager if you can set up continuous integration? To me, that's like asking your manager, can I write a while loop or a for loop? It's your job to know which loop to use. It's your job to know how to name your variables. It's also your job to set up continuous integration and continuous delivery. So don't go ask your manager to do your job. And again, all the products that I'm talking about that do this, you can get started for free. So it's not like you have to go ask for budget. It's not like you have to go ask for time to set this up. You can set up a CI system in 15, 20 minutes. So instead of eating your lunch at a restaurant, bring your lunch in a bag and eat it at your desk and set up continuous integration for your entire organization. And no one else in your team even has to know that you did it. So you don't even have to get buy-in from the entire team, because let's say, for example, we're using a Git repository. and we check in our code to a Git repository, but we do not have continuous integration. People are going to break the build. It's going to be a very painful place to work. You do not have to go ask everybody, can I set up continuous integration? What you do as an individual on your team that knows how to do their job is you go and find a great product that you can get started for free, and you set up continuous integration for your repository. No one else on your team even has to know. Their day-to-day life is exactly the same. They pull the latest code, they check in the latest code, they're happy. You are now more powerful than you were the day before, because one of those people is accidentally going to check in code that breaks the build. And you, because you set up continuous integration for your repository, is going to know that they broke the build, because as soon as that CI system tries to compile it, it's going to say, hey, I can't compile this code. Something's broken. The next morning, you aren't going to do a get latest because you know that the code is broken. Everyone else, just like we do every morning, is going to come in, get the latest code, try to compile it, and all be broken. And they're going to wonder why you're still working really hard at your desk. And they're going to come over and say, hey, Donovan, like, didn't you pull the latest code this morning? Like, no way, I'm not crazy. The build's broken. Like, yeah, I know the build's broken, but how did you know the build's broken? Oh, I set up this thing called a CI system. And every time one of you checks in code, it tries to build it for me. And if it's broken, it lets me know so that I don't get the latest code. Oh my God, that's brilliant, man. Like, can I get in on that? Sure. Give me your email address. I'll have it notify you as well. So you're able to get CI involved without having to ask for permission, without getting everyone on the same page. You added instant value to your team. So instead of asking for permission, just do the right thing. And I think that's going to help a lot too, because the higher up the management chain you go, usually the further away from tech they are. So trying to explain continuous integration to someone who has no idea what you're talking about is a waste of time. And they're just going to say, no, don't do that. Get out of my office and get me the software by the date that I want it, right? So stop wasting time trying to convince the people above you if you can or can't do your job. So hopefully that answers that question for you too. So let me scroll back up here. How difficult, it can be difficult, so I just stopped trying. So to answer your question, how difficult is it to get high-level managers? It can be very difficult, but in my opinion, you're wasting your time, because you might as well be asking them what while loop or for loop should you use. Like, that's your job to getting your point across successfully. Hopefully they'll find a book. A lot of them go to things like Connect or Ignite, the big conferences that we have, and they'll see me on stage during a keynote talk about the importance of this. Another thing is that you have us come in and talk to those executives. A lot of our account teams at Microsoft do that. I've visited a lot of customers and I explained to them that, like I said before, I've already spoken to your competitors and they're already doing this, and that probably puts the fear in them, and they're like, oh my God, like, yeah, you're behind. Go unleash your development teams and let them go do what they need to do. If our development goes wrong at any point, what should we be? Oh, good. So we're talking about rollback or fallback strategy. One of the things that you can do is you can actually build inside of your pipeline rollback scenarios. But what I would prefer that you do is actually go back in and set up staged deployment. Because what you're wanting to do is know before you get into production that you have something wrong, so that you can avoid the rollback altogether. Rollbacks are difficult. Let me put it another way, because we stopped doing rollbacks on the Azure DevOps team a while back, because upgrading a piece of software to a new version is relatively easy. Copy the new files, copy the new binaries, make database schema changes, push it out. Very easy. Undoing that is very hard, especially if you've already made schema changes to your database. Because if your database schema is not backwards compatible to the binaries that you're about to roll back to, you're actually in worse shape than you were before. Right? So you have to be thinking about that rollback strategy on how you're going to deploy your code. Or the other thing you can do is just avoid the rollback altogether. And the way that you do that is you don't deploy directly to production. You deploy to a staging environment instead. You deploy to a dev environment even before that. So you basically get practice of deploying your software. You get to see how these changes are actually going to be made in production before you get to production, minimizing and mitigating the risk that there will be something wrong inside of production. That's not to say you're not prepared to roll back. Let's talk about rollback for a second. When you have a system that has a database in it, when you roll back the binaries, that's easy, right? So I have these binaries that I produced. I put them out there. They're not working correctly. I simply replace them, overwrite them with the old binaries that I know work. And then all of a sudden the system is back up and running, and you can automate that through a CI/CD pipeline. But what if the database changed? The shape, the schema of the database changed. So where if you were to put back the old binaries, they don't understand the schema. The stored procedures don't return the same amount of data. There's more or less columns in a database than there were just a moment ago. Then when you put those binaries back, you also have to fix the database, which could corrupt data, which could be data loss. It's very, very stressful. So what we started doing is making sure that any changes to the database are at least one version backwards compatible, which means if I were to deploy a change to my database, my old binaries better still work against that database schema change. And then what happens is I put in my new binaries once my database is right, and everyone's happy. Should something bad happen, I put the old binaries back, and they work successfully against the old database schema. Then what I would do is push out another version that then fix the database schema, still keeping it compatible with the current binaries, and then whatever binaries I'm going to put in place. So think about that. When you do your database deployments that way, doing something like a deleting of a column takes 2 deployments. Because if I want to delete a column because I'm adding a new feature or I'm adding a table where I'm going to denormalize something, I can't delete that column out of the first table at the first deployment. Because should I have to roll back, then that column won't be there and my binaries will no longer work. But I can just add columns or leave that column there, add the new binaries, everyone's happy. Then I do another version after that, which also doesn't need that old column. Now I can safely delete that column because even if I roll back to the previous binaries, they also don't expect that column to be there. So when you're starting to think about rollback strategies, you also have to be thinking about how long do I need to carry along a little technical debt? How long do I need to carry along a particular schema change such that I need to roll back my binaries? I can do that safely. And then what I can do later, several versions ahead of time, to where even if I roll back, I didn't need it, I can start to clean some of that stuff back up. We use things like triggers to make sure that data stays in sync between 2 different databases or 2 different columns, just as long until we know that we can roll back safely and not need that data. And then you go back in and you remove those triggers, those columns, and whatever information that you need. So be thinking at least 1 or 2 deployments ahead of yourself so that when you roll back, you're able to roll back safely. So when you think about rollback, it's something that you need to be thinking about. But if you do dev and QA environments, what happens is that you're able to determine that, oh, wow, that schema change doesn't work because when I deployed it into QA and run my integration tests, they all failed. Let's go ahead, and I don't even have to roll back QA. Usually you can just destroy QA and re-provision it using infrastructure as code. So it's not as panicking as rolling back in production. Then what you would do is go make a change to your system, deploy it into dev, deploy it into QA, run your integration test again, see if everything is good, and then hopefully push it out into production and everything goes great. That is not 100%, and I'll tell you why. Because data in production is like no other data in the world. There is always something in production that is simply not in your test data in your QA environment. It's not in your test data in your dev environment, and it doesn't show up until you're in production, right? So you want as close to production-like data as you can get, because that's usually what's causing you the most problems. I know that I'm a very optimistic programmer. I assume all the data in my database is really nice, and it's burned me a lot. Because I might put validation in my code eventually, but if the validation wasn't in the code at time 0, there could be data in your database that doesn't meet the criteria or the assumptions of what that data is supposed to look like. So you can't be based off of those assumptions all the time. So again, do dev environment deployments, do QA environment deployments, run integration tests, performance tests, try to find as many problems as you can before you get to production. But be prepared to roll back your binaries. We did that with another pipeline, which would just say, hey, redeploy our exact same pipeline, but I knew what my previous build tag was, and I could just hit that tag and it would redeploy all my old binaries. But I had to make sure that my old binaries worked with my new database schema if I made schema changes. So make sure that you're thinking about your deployment. Make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to do your database changes. And if you're talking about database changes, make sure you use a product like Redgate or SSDT or something that actually automates the deployment of your database schema, just like automating the deployment of your application. You don't want to deploy your application and then go off and run a script that does your SQL deployments. That's very dangerous. Again, human intervention, and obviously going to cause some problems for you there. What you're going to want to do is keep your database as part of your pipeline and deployed like everything else, and that'll make rolling back a lot easier too. All right, so I'm glad you're enjoying this. Very valuable input. That's great. Any good books or courses that you would recommend for? Yes. All right. So the Phoenix Project, that's pretty much like standard reading, right? If you want to understand the impact that DevOps can have, the Phoenix Project is book number 1. Continuous Integration by, or I think it's Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble is another fantastic book that talks about the importance of continuous integration and continuous delivery on your product. And then there's another one, the Phoenix Project, and then I forgot what there's a follow-up to that book too. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but one of you might remember the name. But Gene Kim is a fantastic author for writing the type of books, and they're not just like these technical books. I don't read novels for fun. I only read technical books because I feel like I got to get smarter after the end of reading this book. But the Phoenix Project, I couldn't put it down, right? It's written as a novel, but you're learning across the way. And what's the funniest thing about that book is that you recognize everyone in the book. right? You know these people, like you've worked with these people before. Their names aren't the names they are in the book. Like, holy crap, I know that person. I worked with that person before. It's hilarious to read the book. It's like, man, I've been there. I know where they are. So it's a great book. So our Phoenix Project is good. The DevOps Handbook, there's even another one. So there's a follow-up to the Phoenix Project, but that's another one too, the DevOps Handbook, but also the Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble's a fantastic book. All right, how else are we doing here? The Phoenix Project was just fantastic, man. I couldn't believe how good of a book that was. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left, it looks like. So any other questions?
I have a question, Donovan.
Perfect.
Some of these practices that are part of, let's say, DevOps are matured to a certain extent. If I take my own example, I've been doing CI, continuous integration since 2005, which is like 15 years back. But there are things which are new and there are things which are evolving, like continuous monitoring. Then when we talk about continuous delivery, infrastructure as code. So in your experience, which is the most difficult part for organizations to incorporate in their DevOps practices?
That's a good question. Continuous integration, I remember, again, when I started in 96 at Compaq, like setting up a CI system was like only the most senior people got to do that because it was so freaking hard to do, right? You had the big ProLiant server and you had to understand make scripts, and like it was really, really hard to set up a CI system. But today it's a click of a button. They're free products that do everything. And I think where we're trying to transition to is infrastructure as code is something that everyone needs to start to understand. And I've gotten really big on this bandwagon recently because disaster recovery. So we talked about rollback scenarios earlier in one of the questions. What we haven't talked about is disaster recovery. That is, something catastrophic has happened and taken down an entire region or entire environment, say production, and people can no longer use your application. My question to you is, what does it take to get that system back up and running again? And if it is all hands on deck, everyone get on your cell phones, everyone get on a computer and start deploying everything manually, that's a bad answer. The answer should be, I just redeploy my software. Now, that's an incredibly powerful statement. It seems so simple. All I do is rerun my pipeline and the disaster is going to be completely mitigated. How do you do that? You do infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is where you take the desired state of the infrastructure upon which you intend to run your application and you codify it. It'll be inside of YAML files, or it'll be inside of PowerShell scripts, or it'll be inside of cookbooks or recipes, or whatever the case might be, depending on what tool you use. There's different artifacts that you store in source control. So if I need a VM spun up to host a website, I do not go into the Azure portal and click around and create an Azure VM. What I do instead is I define a file that I check into source control, and I just run my build again. And when I run my build and it creates my CI/CD pipeline, that CI/CD pipeline will stand up the VM for me and then allow me to safely deploy to it. By actually automating the deployment of your infrastructure, you can literally have a disaster where everything is gone, and then you just run your deployment again, and it will stand everything back up for you. You can find this video on YouTube, and it's where I think I was at VS Live in New Orleans. And the story that I tell there is I am a developer who gets a frantic phone call from an engineer saying our system is down. And I go through the normal denial, like, nah, the system's fine. I'm sure, let me just check on my phone. Doesn't work. Let me check on my computer. Oh my God, it doesn't work. Go to the Azure portal. And what I show you is someone accidentally deleted every resource group in my entire subscription. So I literally have an Azure subscription that I do this to all the time. I delete everything inside of it. And then what I do is I simply click one button. And I did this on stage so they can see my website doesn't work. Everyone's on their phone trying to hit my website. It does not work. And I show them that my Azure subscription is completely empty, not a single resource group in there. And I click one button and I start describing to them what's happening in the background. That I'm using infrastructure as code to answer your question, what's the harder thing to do? Right now it's getting infrastructure as code really well dialed in. But for this demo, I had done that. So what happens is my deployment starts. And I can hit F5 in my web browser, and you can start to see these resources starting to pop back up because my infrastructure's code has realized that, oh my gosh, we're missing our app service, we're missing our AKS, we're missing our so-and-so. Let me go start putting those things back for Donovan. And it's so sophisticated. And this is the part that I started laughing when I got this to work, because it's great to stand up all your VMs, but think about it. Your DNS records are now broken. right? Because the IP address of your AKS cluster is probably different than the IP address was an hour ago when your app was working. So you have to then go into your DNS records and update your DNS to point at the new IP address so that when people type in www.mywebsite.com, it actually goes somewhere. Because you can do anything that you want in a CI/CD pipeline, I actually automated the updating of DNS records as part of my pipeline. I literally didn't have to do anything but push a button, sit back and talk to the crowd. And then moments later, the website just came back. The mobile app started working again because all the infrastructure was deployed. And I even made a REST API call out to GoDaddy. I queried my IP address from AKS and was back up. So to me, that changes the game drastically because disaster recovery is just a deployment. So now what I've been doing, which is kind of interesting, is I actually build my infrastructure as code before I deploy my code for the first time. So I'll build my DevOps pipeline, I'll put my infrastructure as code in place, and I will deploy my pipeline. And what I'll see is inside of Azure, I'll see my entire infrastructure stand up. And then what I do is I delete the entire resource group, and then I run my pipeline again. And then I watch my infrastructure stand up. And I do that until everything that I need is stood up correctly, secured correctly, and then I start developing my application. And every time I do, the app just rushes inside of that environment. I also love infrastructure as code because dev environments and QA environments don't have to be permanent right now. Without infrastructure as code, it's so painful to set up an environment. We usually set them up and leave them there because setting them up again is really, really painful, which means we're paying for resources. We're probably paying for stuff to be running that doesn't need to be running. When you're using infrastructure as code, what you can do is actually deploy the dev environment, which code works correctly, and then I can go into deployment into production. Infrastructure as code not only makes sure that you can stand up an environment, it also makes sure that an environment looks correct because it's safe for you to run infrastructure as code over and over again. So let's say you have a production environment, everything's working great. I can take my infrastructure as code and deploy it again and nothing will go wrong. It'll just verify that, yep, you needed a VM, it's the right size, the right ports are open on your firewall. There's nothing for me to do. You needed an app service, there it is, it's the right size, there's nothing for me to do. But if someone were to go in and break something, let's say, for example, what they did is they closed a port on your firewall. Then all of a sudden, no one can get to your application because the port that you need open isn't open. That is a needle in a haystack. A lot of us are going to be running around trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, and all they did is they changed a port. If you've done infrastructure as code correctly, instead of you trying to figure out what the human being changed, you simply run your pipeline again. And your pipeline is going to say, oh, that's not supposed to be port 8080. It's supposed to be port 8081. Let me fix that for you. And then your app instantly starts working again without you having to go troubleshoot every individual change that happened by an individual. Infrastructure as code is an extremely, extremely powerful technique that I think lots of people can benefit from because disaster recovery and finding those needles in a haystack becomes a lot easier with that. The other thing that I find that people aren't doing enough of is collecting telemetry. Telemetry is data about the usage of your application such that you can determine if you're actually delivering value or not. One of the key words in the definition that we have at Microsoft is value. We didn't say software. It's not about deploying software. It's about deploying value to your end users. And you can't just assume that you delivered value. If you're an Agile shop or a Scrum shop, you're using something called a product backlog. It's a list of everything that you want your software to do, and it should be in priority order. The only way that we know it's in priority order is that we don't. We assume that it's in priority order based on the priorities given to us by our product owner. But if you use telemetry correctly, you can implement the item that's at the top of the list and then put telemetry in the code that says every time this code is executed, I'm going to increment a counter or send data over to App Insight so that you can aggregate and count how often this particular feature is used. So if you do the top item and then you ship it and your telemetry says nobody is using this, did you deliver value? No. You just copied a new feature there that you thought was important because you were told so by your product owner. But now you can use actual live telemetry to say, hey, that thing that was at the top of the list, nobody's using that. Let's go back and look at our priorities and maybe change the priorities, try something different, and see if we can actually deploy something that people actually want to use. But you can only know if it was valuable or not if you have telemetry telling you that it's valuable. So the answer is two things. Telemetry is really important and things that people need to be moving towards. And infrastructure as code, to me, is a no-brainer, especially as you move to the cloud to be able to stand up environments, destroy environments, and then recover from disaster really quickly. Like some questions are coming in too.
Yeah, I think the last one is quite interesting.
Okay.
How do you properly test your declarative pipelines for correctness? And I think it's more related to YAML. and
Got
how
it.
do we validate? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that you can do when it comes to pipelines for Azure DevOps. Inside of VS Code, there's actually a linter that you can get. There's an extension that you can get that'll give you some very quick high level, like that doesn't exist, that parameter is not named right. So it does schema validation for you for YAML. I can't stand how finicky YAML is, right? YAML, like one space off, your entire pipeline's garbage now. And I created a extension. No, it's not really extension. It's a module, PowerShell module. It's called VS Team. And one of the commandlets or functions inside of VS Team will take your YAML off of your hard drive and verify it with you without running it, right? So there is a command that you can run inside of VS Team that will verify that your YAML actually will successfully be deployed inside of your environment. The other thing that you want to do is you want to test your YAML changes in a pull request. So what I mean by that is that your YAML pipeline is just code. It's code like anything else now. So what you can do is make a modification to it. You can then check that into a separate branch and then issue a pull request. And the pull request will use your version of the YAML file. But master is still safe, your main branch is still successful, but your pull request branch will now use your new YAML definition and let you know if it's broken or not, let you know if it can successfully compile it or not. And wait, yet until you can get a successful compile in your branch, you should not then merge that into master, which will then become the definition for everyone else on your team. So one of them is using the extensions inside of VS Code to help you lint and have schema validation and some syntax checking. The other is make sure that you only make changes to your YAML pipeline through a pull request. That way the pull request can be built and verified before you merge it into master, before you break everyone else. Hopefully that answers the question there. And the other thing that we used to be able to do this. I don't know if you can still do this. Our pipeline, our agent is open source. So like you can go and download the code for our agent and build it locally on your machine. And I haven't done this in a while, but in the past when YAML first came out, which was really cool, is that you could download our agent, install it and build it on your machine, and then run your YAML locally. Like you could run it without having to commit it, right? So I haven't done that in a long time because I just use pull requests now. But you might want to go and investigate that because you might be able to just simply run our agent locally on your machine. And what you could do is there was a command that you had to pass in with some certain parameters and say like, here's my YAML file, I'm running locally, and it would try to run your build for you and let you know if your build was going to be successful. And it's a nice little inner loop that you could use versus having to always push it and then have the build run in a pull request. Yeah, exactly. So someone made the comment that YAML is very readable but not very writable. Like literally tabs versus spaces, two spaces versus three spaces. It's a nightmare to get that stuff correct. But it's a necessary evil. I remember, I'll tell you a quick anecdote about YAML. I'm like everyone else. I'm slow to move to stuff, right? I like what I do. I've been writing software since the 90s, and I'm a kind of a creature of habit. I hated going to Git, for example. You can find videos of me publicly saying I hate Git, and now it's the only source control system that I use, so I'm human. YAML is the same thing. I hated YAML pipelines when they first came out. And if you've ever used Azure DevOps, the user interface that we have for authoring YAML is beautiful user interface. Like it makes authoring pipelines really, really easy. And then all of a sudden I dropped down into this text editor and spaces versus tabs. I freaking hated it, and I avoided it for as long as I could. And the reason that the light came on for me on why YAML is important was when I'm working on a team. When I first started building a team, I hired Jessica Dean, Abel Wang, Steve Moraski, and Damian Brady, and we were called The League. And we have a website that shows where we're going to be speaking and our bios and our pictures and stuff so that we can give them to organizers. Whenever you make a change to that particular product or that website, you have to go through a pull request. Our pull request would actually compile our code and make sure that everything was successful before it would actually merge into master. Well, I had gone in and I'd made a lot of changes, and we weren't using YAML. We were using the visual editor for build, which means the only way that you could modify your build was to go to the portal and modify your build. Great experience, but it actually caused a problem for me. I had changed the structure of the project such that our original build definition would not build the code that was inside of my pull request. But the only way I can get my pull request into master is that it has to successfully build. So now I have a problem because the changes that I've made will not pass the build that we have currently. So what I have to do then is go and change the build before my pull request goes in. But if I do that, anyone else who sends in changes that need the old build definition are now broken. So it's like one of us is going to be broken. Either I'm going to be broken or the rest of my team is going to be broken because we only have this one central definition of our pipeline. But when we switched over to YAML, when I changed the structure of my project, I can actually change the structure of the YAML build inside the exact same pull request so that when Abel sends in his changes that uses the old build definition, it'll work successfully. And then when I send in my changes who need a new build definition, mine will also work because the build definition is actually in the pull request with me so that when I merge my changes into master, everyone is successful. And that's when the light bulb came on for me like, oh, okay, now I understand why YAML is important. It's important because it allows me to change the build as part of my pull request, not having to have the central definition that now is basically everyone on the team is dependent on that. And if I change it, I essentially break everyone but myself. So then I realized, okay, it's a price that I need to pay. I need to get into this YAML thing because it fixes a problem that I'm currently having. And then we basically found better tools out there. One of the other things that's kind of cool is that YAML and JSON are very closely related, and there's converters out there for you that will convert from one to the other. So, and they actually have some of those extensions built right into Visual Studio Code. Another piece, like, so a lot of people prefer one versus the other. And what I would do is I would just author it all in JSON and then have that tool write it out as YAML for me and get all my spaces and tabs and everything all correct for me. So there's ways around the pain that is writing YAML by using some of the extensions and tools that allow you to write it in a more natural form and then make sure that it's all fixed up for you afterwards. That's a great question. All right, we have about 3 minutes left. So what else would you like to ask before we wrap up?
I think we still have time for probably one last question.
Sure.
If you don't mind. So who wants to take that opportunity and ask the last question for the day?
I bet you thought we weren't going to be able to fill an hour with just questions. I told you. It's easy. Yeah, the Unicorn Project. Thank you. Yeah, that's the other book I was talking about. Yeah, that was the other book. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through to make sure that did we miss any in the chat so far? Or did we get everything else?
I think we covered all the questions. So,
all right, so the last bit of advice I'll give you then is make sure that you're really serious about Agile. I'm a firm believer that you have to be good at Agile before you start worrying about being good at DevOps, because you need to be producing an increment of shippable software before you actually worry about shipping it. And there's a saying, I did not invent this, but I love it, that crap shipped fast is still crap. Right, so you don't want to automate a pipeline that's just going to rush your mistakes into production. You want to be producing increments of shippable software, and Agile and Scrum are great ways of actually doing that. I'm a big fan of it, big proponent of it. So focus on getting good at Agile. Focus on producing increments of actual shippable software, not software that needs to be tested next sprint. Not software that's kind of close but not quite right. You're supposed to be producing an increment of shippable software. What that normally means is doing smaller chunks of work, not thinking really big. Think about vertical slices of your application, not horizontal layers of your application. And when you do that, you're going to start to change the way that you design your software. You're going to be able to move a lot faster. And then every one of your changes gets pushed out into production using the DevOps best practices that we've been talking about.
So I think we are right on time, and if there are no other questions, we can conclude this session here. Donovan, thank you. Thanks a lot for taking time, early morning your time.
No
and
problem.
Really appreciate the help. This was one of the really wonderful sessions we have had over the last 1 month or so. We have
Awesome.
had, as I said, 3 sessions, which were done by some of your team members as well. And this is really helpful. I hope that once this COVID situation improves, we'll have opportunity for you to come down to Singapore and our community can have face-to-face discussions and
I'd love to.
opportunity to meet you.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting on the other side of this with everyone else as well. I'm glad that we still have an opportunity to interact, even though it's virtual. It's definitely better than nothing, but I'd love to come back to your country. Is beautiful, so I'd love to come back.
Yeah, there is a suggestion that I can buy you a durian.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
just know what those things are. Those are some scary looking fruit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sure, why not? I would love to.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, great session, Donovan. Thanks a lot. Thanks once again. And thanks everyone for attending this one.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure.
Good night.